Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Today, we are talking about the paradox of the lonely life as a mother. And joining us is relationship expert and award-winning author and virtual and live guest speaker, Heather Dugan. Thank you so much, Heather, for joining me today.
Very happy to talk with you, Janet.
To our viewers, if you have any questions or comments, just make sure you put them in the comments section and we will get to those as we can. And I'm excited to get started. So first, let's just talk about this topic. So according to a recent study by the Wall Street Journal, many women who are never alone because of their children and their families are reporting feeling really lonely.
Yes.
What is going on, Heather? What is the story?
It seems like such a paradox, doesn't it? I mean, mom is the hub of the family, connected into every life around her, and everybody wants her. But unfortunately, loneliness is a very subjective experience. So you can be in the middle of a crowd of people that know you well, but if you don't really feel understood and connected to that, like they're not hearing you, you're busy taking care of them, then you don't have that connected feeling. And it's very isolating. You can be the busiest, most connected woman in the world and feel very lonely in a moment. Even, when all these happy things are happening around you. And so that juxtaposition of I should feel this way, but I don't. I feel this way can be really disconcerting and confusing. And unfortunately, our general shift on something like that is to look and think there's something wrong with ourselves when that isn't the case at all.
So how common is this? How common is it for women to feel this way?
It seems like most times casual conversations, even when you speak to someone that's in the throes of motherhood, it's very common, super common, because they're so busy taking care of things. There aren't the moments to really focus on what is personally felt or needed. And we've had some major cultural shifts in the last few years in terms of the way we communicate with one another. The value we put on conversation has changed a bit. I do a lot of speaking, as you mentioned, and I talk about how we've shifted from conversation more to communication. Exchanges of facts. So there aren't those long conversations that kind of draw you out and allow you to share your inner thoughts. A lot of us don't have that. If you don't have that with your spouse or your partner, and you aren't having the opportunities to connect with other women friends, perhaps, or family members, wherever the opportunities seem like they should be, you can it just grows and grows in the pace of life. Certainly, with the pandemic, as we all know, we lost a lot of opportunities to get out and connect. We also lost a lot of those release valves that kind of release some of that pressure.
So it sounds like what really is happening is that motherhood is turned into a bit of a one-way street, that you're as a mother, you're constantly giving and sort of sending things out, but you're not necessarily getting what you need back. Is that right?
I think very often, and the giving is often such a joy that mothers don't recognize the fact that there is the need there, that there's that space within themselves. Because you can't share if you're with say you're a stay-at-home mom and you're with your kids all the time, or they've been home, they've been home with the having school from home for all this time. You aren't going to be dumping all your personal thoughts into them. That would be very inappropriate. And yet these are the people that are around you all the time. So, you're with them, but you can't have the degree of closeness that you need with somebody with your kids. It just isn't the right place.
Right. So who is most impacted by this? Is there a certain population of moms? And who are we looking to see who's being most impacted?
Yeah, transition points happen frequently. We don't even realize, we're so busy juggling the latest logistics that we don't notice what the shifts mean. As our children shift maybe into another sports season or into another school, or maybe a move happens, anything like that. Anytime that we have a transition in life that kind of strips away the social context that we've been living with, the carpool moms that you saw every day last year, well, they're going to different schools this year.
Right.
Maybe you didn't have deep conversations, but they said your name out loud. They did not call you mom, and that can be a very big thing, right? You are
Right.
seen, you are recognized. So those transition points happen so fast sometimes, they
Mhm.
accumulate. And they tend to, the more you feel like you're juggling, and I was one of those moms. This is why I know so much about this subject intimately, as well as from the conversations and interviews I've done. But when you're in the midst of that, your life feels kind of messy.
Mhm.
It gets harder and harder to invite other people in,
Mhm.
because you want to clean it up a little first, but
Hmm.
not realizing that actually this need for connectedness is a biological need that we all share.
Mhm.
And you're showing your vulnerability makes you that much more human and approachable. So
Mhm.
people actually, welcome you. Don't, I mean, when you're drawn to somebody, it is generally to somebody that you feel like you really see them. If,
Mhm.
if you feel like you're looking at a perfect person who has, this sheen about their life that is so far beyond your reach, that, you may aspire to that, but you may not want to sit down and have coffee with them.
Mhm.
You'd
Mhm.
rather sit with the woman that has a little bit of a mess on her shirt because she was doing the same kind of catch up thing that you were doing this morning.
Right, right, definitely. Everybody needs a hot mess friend because you need
Right. You
you need
do.
somebody who's like, "Oh yeah, I can relate to that."
I can fit in with that. Right.
So why is this happening so much? Is it just the accumulation of transition points, or is there more at play?
Well, I do think the pace of life has changed in many ways. And we have just been going through this pandemic, and the strain it has put on our coping skills. We are maxed out.
Mhm.
I don't think we recognize enough. We're holding it together, but it takes energy to hold it
Mhm.
together. And
Mhm.
that energy came from somewhere. Okay.
Mhm.
So there's less, our social skills aren't as strong as they used to be. It takes, you have to exercise those muscles to use them well. And a lot of people are out of practice. People have told me after talks, I feel like I have to practice. I was afraid nothing would come out when I opened my mouth, and having those conversations, you forget how to ask about the weather or something basic.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody can relate to that, but also that the pace of life. And I think, while we have slowed down and had more of an ability to begin, we have an ability now, I want to point out, to make some selective choices as we add things back into our life again.
Mhm.
But pre-pandemic, a lot of people were too busy,
Mhm.
recognizably too busy, too many things. I was one of those moms with, if it's Tuesday, it's soccer. If it's Wednesday, it was on, three kids. It was crazy at times. I didn't know
Mhm.
which way was coming or going. Um, and there's been this onslaught of opportunity, and digitally speaking, and in terms of physical options, et cetera, after school or whatever, and just in our daily lives. In my book, I talk about the opportunity clutter that we face every day. I mean, just walking down the grocery aisle is a huge, if you're trying to pick out a breakfast cereal, that's a huge mind game, right? Well, we have that kind of decision making process on about everything we do, which
Right.
leaves us with less of a bandwidth for just being engaged in the moment. When you're in a checkout line with somebody,
Mhm.
you might be scrolling through recipes on your phone, and can I get this done with what I've got in shopping cart,
Right.
or did I forget something, instead of oh, hi, how's your day going, which
Right.
is really how we connect with people in the moment.
Right. Right. Um, yeah, it's so interesting to think about, all the pieces that are at play here because, this was an issue when you published your book, a few years
Mhm.
ago, and now the pandemic's hit and it slowed life down a lot and it took away a lot of opportunity, but yet it was also incredibly isolating and it changed how we communicate because one of the things that you said was that we're no longer communicating in the same way that we used to. Um, so in some ways, it made things better, but then in other ways it made things terribly worse.
It's
So,
created. Yeah. There's
so
opportunity. Yeah.
right. And so I don't know, where does that leave us? Moving out of the pandemic, was that a reset, or did it just introduce a whole new slew of problems to moms who were already struggling
It
with
depends
creating
what,
a network?
right. I think it depends with what you do with it.
Hmm.
A lot of times, we have so many distractions available to us, and we avail ourselves of those with social media, with streaming. There's a zillion ways not to look at what you don't want to face, right? And the
Right.
problem is when we think there's something wrong with us, we let it kind of swirl in the background. And I like to say, it's your room, your elephant. What are you going to do with that thing? Bring it in
Right.
front of you and say, I'm not real connected right now. Why
Mm,
is that? And
mm,
but before you start saying, well, there must be something wrong with me, look at the factors. We do texting more than we should. We do emails more than we should. Instead of using those to make life more efficient, we kind of are efficient for efficiency's sake. We forgot what the
mm.
reasons were and kind of value momentum over the moments that we're in. But what happens is, we kind of dilute our connection that way. So, yeah, you could pick up the phone and make a phone call, but that'll take a whole minute. And I could just type that into my phone, send it out to 3 people, and I'm done.
Right,
Not
right.
realizing, that conversation is really what connects you to somebody.
Huh.
So a lot of it, we have to make some more thoughtful choices on some of the basics. And as moms, also, it's important to remember that you are modeling how to connect with people to your kids.
Mm,
And so you're choosing that for yourself and saying, perhaps, mom needs to get some time with friends. That is a valuation that will bear dividends in their own lives down the line. So it's really important because you don't want them to wonder how to begin a conversation and how to find friends in a new neighborhood. These are things that we're teaching them now, how to reach
right.
out and to not, fear that kind of connection.
Right, right. So you touched on this just really
Mhm.
briefly, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about the role that social media is playing
Mm,
with how moms are feeling. I think, on paper you could justify it either way. You could say, look, there's a great I'm connected to so many people, and
mhm.
I'm able to keep in touch with friends that maybe live on the other side of the country. But then it could also yet be super isolating. And
Right.
if you're saying that's not a legitimate form of communication where you're not feeling fulfilled, what is your take on social media? Is it all negative? Does it serve a positive role? And what would you recommend?
It is a tool if we use it the right way. Unfortunately, a lot of people snack on it. It's
I
the
love that
distraction.
metaphor.
It's true. We scroll through it, and passive use is really detrimental.
Mm,
In the friendship upgrade, there's a story about an interview with a woman who was in an abusive situation, and Facebook was her escape. It was her window on the world. But the more she saw the happy lives of others, which were, of course, carefully curated for social media, right?
right.
Nobody showed the bad stuff. But she looked at those, and instead of giving her hope, it just had such a luster to it that it seemed more and more hopeless for her to ever achieve that.
Mm,
So if you are using social media to actually engage with people and maybe bring that face to face from that situation,
mhm.
it's a stopgap. We can't look at that and think that that's really going to fill that connected feeling that we need, because we can't understand somebody with so many characters on a screen. I mean, you may feel like you know each other,
Right.
but understanding and having those intimate conversations really requires all the visual cues.
Mhm.
These We make a lot of guesses in our communication now because we have given up a lot of those basic social cues that we used to rely on. And the
Mhm.
more we can bring those back, take your Facebook friends
Mhm.
and meet them somewhere, maybe in a park for a walk, get that outdoor fresh air that's so good for us, and also the social time. I lower your expectations on what you need an event or a get together to be, but take it somewhere live.
Hmm.
the best you can, any form to give you, use the Facebook as the tool that it should be in our
Mhm,
lives.
mhm. Where do you think something like Zoom or FaceTime fits into
Mm.
this? Because, it is a live conversation. You can see the person's face. Is that fulfilling enough? Or is it because it's virtual, there is this sort of still a missing piece?
Well, there is something still missing. Unfortunately, like right now, as we're speaking, if I look at the green light and not actually at your face, it looks like I'm looking at you, but we have
Right.
this leg between us. And
Right.
there's just a little bit of a, our brains don't catch up with that as well.
Uh-huh.
And there are things we miss. And there can be this feeling of being on,
Mhm.
if I were walking with you on a trail somewhere, we would also be taking in the other scenery. Conversation flows very easily when you're not always feeling like somebody's looking at you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
That's a different
Mhm.
kind of a conversation.
Mhm.
I know sometimes with, for instance, with especially one of my kids, I have to leave space for him to generate thoughts in conversation in his own head. If
Mm.
if if we're in a conversation and that space isn't there, those words aren't going to come out.
Mhm.
So this is a little artificial for if this were our only interaction and we were excuse me, if we were like, friends or family.
Mhm.
But it can be useful. I have a daughter who lives out of state now. She's just got married last fall. And we love to see each other's face, but we know that's not everything.
Right.
And we also know that a phone conversation will often feel more intimate
Hmm.
than FaceTime or Zoom.
Hmm, hmm. That's really interesting to hear that because I agree, but yet I've never sort of thought about it and
Mm,
how and Zoom is something that we've really relied on the past few years, and it's become now normalized within our lives, maybe certainly more than it was pre-pandemic, and yes, of course, FaceTiming with grandparents and grandchildren who live on the other
right.
side of the country, I think was a commonplace thing to do, but now it's everything, and it's how many people are working. I
Yes.
mean, and this podcast is a perfect example of before we used to have conversations in a studio live,
Hmm.
sitting across the table from someone, and that's
Right.
not how we do it anymore. So there is that piece that is missing, that it just feels very different. And even though it's so much more convenient, and you said
Hmm.
before, you were like, well, why are we doing this? Like, in
Hmm.
terms of, yes, we're saying, oh, it's more, we can do things faster, or we can do it more efficiently, but is that really, what's the goal or purpose
That's the
of
thing.
what we're trying to achieve? And so in this case, if we're talking about friendship,
Mhm.
then it doesn't really matter how fast or maybe
Right.
slow is actually much better.
Well,
um
I think you have to create the space to grow friendships instead of sticking them into the leftover spaces. And
right.
as moms, it's really difficult to make that a priority. But,
Right.
we are not known as a species for our moderation. We latch onto things and we go,
Right.
and if I am being efficient, I can fit one more thing in this day. You
Right.
get in that. And people, that impacts conversations between partners. You're
Mhm.
shifting from a work conversation where you're trying to solve something and shifting immediately into a family situation, and you're still being efficient in your conversation sometimes. So there's a
Right.
lot of things going on in our heads. And we also, I think, this is important to bring up, I think, we assume a lot of times that people are interpreting what we mean in the way we mean it. And we've got so many filters that have come down from the way we've grown up, our varied histories and perspectives. You put people in a room and you make it silent, it's going to mean one thing to one person and something different to another, depending
Mhm.
on what kind of household they grew up, whether
Right.
silence was a calming thing or if it meant that somebody had a conflict under the surface. So
Right.
just all those factors are part of what comes between us. And
Right.
the more that we can be in person, I think the less those become the looming factors if they can be.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, so we've talked about the problem, and we've talked about a lot of things that can make it better.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest things that I'm hearing from you is
Mhm.
like, just see your friends in person. and you have to make time for it. So what
Yeah.
is maybe some other advice that you have on how to actually implement this? Like if you are a mom that realized
Mhm.
that, oh my gosh, I've put my heart and soul into my kids and I've completely left my personal network behind, what advice would you give her to be able to help her move forward and regain what she's lost?
Yes, this was me. I was the crazy mom running to the curb with the trash can overflowing in my bathrobe. There was no time for friendship in my life unless they could drive, and fulfill a carpool role. Okay.
Right,
So
right.
all of a sudden there I am. And, a big part was the awareness, and understanding through research that it wasn't my fault, that it wasn't some defect that I had, that it was very explainable. That allowed me to be more vulnerable and to understand that everybody shared this need. So I made a point then of I did work from home, but I took my laptop to a coffee shop on a regular basis. I started scheduling things. I made myself, it was uncomfortable, but I said, you need to set one thing up a week with somebody else outside,
Mhm.
and setting those instead of just intending to do them, putting them on my calendar so that I couldn't like go, oh, well, next week,
Right,
and,
right.
and double it up. If you like fitness, find somebody in your neighborhood or somebody that is proximate that you can meet for a walk or a run or whatever it is you're into.
Mhm.
But the point is, keep it flexible. Don't set your expectations too high because it can begin to feel with all the cancellations we've had that you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. But,
Mhm.
it's really important to be other aware, even saying hello to people is something because it's an exchange. And then I actually took it a step further. I accidentally founded this group for women called Cabernet Coaches. And what I did was I just started inviting people to get together on a
Mhm.
regular basis and not being a planner and totally disliking the idea of committing my time in one place when I like flexibility.
Right.
This was really against my grain, but I kept it simple. And
Mhm.
it still goes, it started in 2013. We've done it differently through the pandemic, but the basic nugget of it is a Wednesday evening happy hour because
Mhm.
it's low cost. Everybody can afford it. It's a low time commitment thing. And then we move it around so that people can get to it from wherever they are.
Mhm.
Anybody can bring anybody in. So you're not committed. You may not have anything in common with this woman you met at the grocery, but you bring her to this group and she's going to find somebody she clicks with.
Uh-huh.
And then we did, we have Facebook groups and that kind of thing so that people can find their own friend groups from within that group. So,
Mhm.
people travel together, they do yoga, they do art, they have, in biking, whatever. But I created a resource in my community. And I would encourage women, if you need something more in your community, you can be the one to do it. I mean, it
Mm.
may be there already. You can Google search and find their meetup groups, Facebook groups. But if there isn't, you can be that person. I am the last person in the world that should have done what I did, to be honest. Ask anybody. My daughter automatically signed me up for games because anything organized was beyond me when they were looking for classroom assignments for parents. So I'm just saying, truth.
That's too funny, but that's great advice to hear. It's like, just do it, find a way. And if
Yeah.
you can't, then do it yourself. Do you have any advice for younger moms who
Mm,
maybe aren't to the point where their kids are transitioning and they're finding these sort of pivot points where they're
yeah.
struggling and realize they've lost a network? Maybe even you're pregnant and you have a baby on the way. What would you suggest that women do to make sure that they are maintaining the friendships that they have?
Right. And you may not feel like you need it because you're overwhelmed right now. And I
Mm,
understand that, but leave a bookmark there. Don't shut the windows. I remember getting to a point and saying, the door's shut, everybody's
mhm,
gone. Where'd
mhm.
everybody go?
Right.
Try not to let that be you. Find people that you have something in common with and understand there are a few years there where it may be, we have proximate friends that kind of come and go as our life
Mhm,
changes. It's good if we can have some threads that run strong through. Those friends that have known you for a long time are very valuable, but value whoever you can spend time with and be real with in
mhm.
the meantime. And it doesn't need to be a huge planned event. but just try to keep that space and hold it sacred for yourself.
Mhm.
And don't lose touch of those things that make you, insert your name here, whatever your name is,
Mhm.
Janet, whatever makes Janet, Janet, don't let go. Keep some of that for yourself, because you're going to want to discover and develop that again later. And it'll be really good for your kids to see this multidimensional mother that, that's the person that they want to be as they grow up, man or woman or whatever. They need to be multidimensional, and
Right.
they will have that courage to do so and the enthusiasm to do so if it's modeled for them.
Right. Yeah. Um, what about dads? Is this a
Mm.
problem that happens with men? And when they sort of enter into family life, do they lose themselves as well? And does it look the same as when this happens to moms?
I've heard a lot on this lately, especially because and there's been more transitions where dads are becoming the stay-at-home caretaker and that kind of thing. It is harder for men many times. They're the first ones. I've had men want a group like I have for my women for them, and it needs to be a man to do that, I believe, to keep the dynamics correct. But men have the same need, and they aren't always as open to the sharing that women are immediately, but they have that need to be understood so that they won't feel lonely, just the same as women do. I have heard of men starting their own groups, for dads, that kind of thing. And I think if you feel the need, you should assume that other men around you do too.
Mhm.
Because, and if, dads, if they're part of I think dads are more integrated into the family than they would have been, like, 40 years ago. It was kind of, they were the provider, and, that was more likely than actually part of the family unit. But, yes, enjoy all these places in your life, whether, your work, your relationship with your partner, with your kids, but try each partner and each parent needs to create a space separate as well. And for the relationship too, because for the long-term relationship, I tell people, you need to envision the two of you as a Venn diagram. You've got your separate spaces, and then you've got your overlap. The
Mhm.
overlap right now has a lot of family in it, but don't let go of those parts of yourself that you've brought into the relationship or that are still developing, because it also will make you, the two of you, a much stronger couple, because you're bringing more oxygen into the bubble.
Mhm.
It's not just what's already in there.
Mhm. Mhm. Right, exactly. Especially when, as you've been saying, when children grow up and move on, then
Right.
what is that center space going to look like, and what are you
Yes.
bringing in from your space into that shared space? Um,
Yes.
So, do you have any recommendations for resources? And
Mhm.
you mentioned, okay, like if you're struggling to find a network, look in these various places, look to your neighborhood listserv or Facebook group, or and then start your own group and have it be in person.
Mhm.
And then you've just talked a little bit about your book. I'd love to hear more. But what are some resources, including your book, that you would recommend
Mhm.
that parents, particularly moms, can jump into?
Sure. Yeah, and actually in the book, I do list some ideas in terms of resources and ways to, to do a good Google search to find what you're looking for.
Mhm.
I think the awareness is there right now. Honestly, it's more about the impetus because people are low on energy. So
Mm.
I think it's important to encourage your own self to take the steps you need to do. But
Mhm.
yes, in the book, the Friendship Upgrade, Trade Clickable Connections for Friendships That Matter, I talk through a lot of the things that isolate and the things that can block us as we're trying to rebuild again. And it's all very fixable. That's the big thing. I
Mm.
really, again and again, it is, it's a condition that is easily solved. It's just a matter of recognizing it and changing, some of the parameters in your life. But,
Mhm.
everybody has the need, everybody has the ability, I believe, to get connected. But yeah, there are resources, Facebook, certainly the, meetup is sometimes an option that people use. Volunteering is a great way to connect with people, and you can get your kids in there too. There's virtual opportunities, but there's a lot of, volunteering ones that include a social aspect as well. find a cause that you and the kids all are into, if you
Mhm.
need to, and then you can have a separate satellite experience out of that. Check with your metro parks. There's a lot of programs there, and they're always, a lot of those are happy for, volunteers.
Mhm.
So there, and the thing about volunteering, it is a great reminder that you are valuable too.
Mhm.
You're
Mhm.
doing something to connect with other people, but it's also like a reminder that, yeah, I am kind of cool. I've got some good talents to put in this world. So, we need that stuff. And may I please speak quickly? Self-talk. This is huge. And I talk about this in the book. When we're alone too much with our own thoughts, we have a tendency to listen to what I call the hateful heckler. It like does this negative play-by-play on what you messed up,
Mhm.
and which is really messed up in itself, because you're trash talking the home team basically. So, we have to learn to affirm ourselves and feel good about it, because,
Mhm.
that's not anybody else's responsibility.
Mhm.
It really
Mhm.
isn't. You're a grown up, so we have to be happy, and comfortable telling ourselves, good job. And
Right.
again, what a thing to model to your kids, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
showing, yeah, it's not ego. It is just an understanding that, yeah, I nailed it. It's good. We can be
Right.
happy about that. Hmm.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Seeing the power of that confidence that you're instilling in your children, and building resiliencies. If something
Hmm.
doesn't go well, like, okay, I messed up. This is what I can do to fix it. But it's okay.
Yes.
We all make mistakes, and I don't need to feel bad about it, and I don't need
Hmm.
to sort of drag myself through the mud to get to the other side.
Absolutely. I decided my check is I don't say anything to myself that I wouldn't say to my kids. And that is a
Yes.
measure. That's a measure. And so you encourage your kids,
Mhm.
exactly as you said. Nice job, nice try. Next time, why don't we, what are you going to do differently? Right?
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also loved your piece of advice about volunteering, and that's a great way
Mhm.
to grow your network. And I have actually heard that a couple other times, but I don't think I've ever put it together, particularly with women. That is such a powerful way to make connections, both as friendships, but
Yes.
then they often blossom into even more. I've
Yeah.
heard of new businesses come out of volunteer opportunities. I've
Mhm.
heard of great community ideas that the volunteerism completely went in a new direction that ended up benefiting the community in ways they
Right.
never anticipated. And it's something that I've heard particularly with women, that it's
Mhm.
this amazing outlet. And I think a lot of younger moms haven't necessarily quite discovered that yet. And I think one might just
Yeah.
be the time suck. You're so entrenched
Mhm.
in daily life and making sure you get out the door and the laundry's clean. But I think it's just so important to reiterate that the power of volunteering, and then all the good that it brings the
Yeah.
yourself and the community, and you never know what's going to blossom from it.
Right. And the nice thing is the focus is elsewhere. So if you
Right.
have any kind of self-conscious tendencies, it removes that,
Right.
and I'm thinking too, people volunteer for as ushers for productions. So then they
Right.
get to see the latest productions, and they also kind of are with people that share that affinity for, certain cultural things.
Right.
So
Right. So you can
there are a
follow your
lot of,
passion in the process.
yes, right. And remind yourself, oh yeah, I do have passions outside of, tomorrow's lunch or whatever.
Right, right, right. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Heather Dugan. What a great conversation. And definitely all of our viewers, check out the Friendship Upgrade. Thank you also to all of our viewers and listeners today. Make sure that you do visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in both video and podcast format. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.